Breaking tonight, complete chaos in Ferguson, Missouri. The same streets that saw violent protests this summer now being rocked by a level of destruction that we have not yet seen before. Storefronts smashed in, police cars torched and turned over. Earlier, the St. Louis County prosecutor was asked about the testimony, in particular, from African-American witnesses. Listen.
Sir, were there any African-American witnesses who testified that Michael Brown was coming towards the officer when Brown was shot?
Yes. All the ones that I mentioned specifically were all African-Americans. That the one who indicated that he came at him in a full charge, and that that as Officer Wilson fired shots at him, Mr. Brown stopped. And Officer Wilson stopped shooting, and as Mr. Brown started charging at him again, those are his words, his testimony, Mr. Wilson started shooting again. And so the others who had very consistent stories, not just with each other, or not just their stories or their testimony throughout, but they were consistent with the others, several others, they're all African American.
Joining me now, Arthur Aidala, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. I mean, I guarantee you that soundbite's not going to go everywhere tomorrow.
You're correct.
They're not going to play that for the protesters who are saying that this is a racial thing and that this is the fix was in.
Okay, well, there's two sets of people here. There are protesters and there are rioters. Those people who are rioting, burning down, Megan, I bet you they don't know the name of the prosecutor. They don't know any of the crimes. They're using this as an excuse.
I agree with that, but what about the protesters?
Violent.
Because I see the protesters, and I see some who have a legitimate gripe about relations with law enforcement in cities across this country where those relations could easily be improved by both sides working together, both sides, okay? But I don't know whether those people know what the actual testimony was, or whether they believe the representations of a guy like Al Sharpton, who just went out there and stoked the fires by giving them misinformation after misinformation, never to be corrected.
Well, how about this? The people who are currently protesting are doing this whole hands up thing, and I believe one of the things that the prosecutor said is there's not really evidence that he had his hands up in the air like he was about to surrender when he was shot. So that's like a whole myth. And he said that so many people who had testified were shown to be lying, absolutely lying. They weren't even there.
And they
hadn't even seen the shooting.
They got caught when the forensic evidence came in after their testimony.
And the other thing is, Megan, all of those grand jurors, because they were not sequestered, they knew the potential ramifications of their decision not to indict. And all that shows me is the evidence must have been so bad, so shabby, that they couldn't even indict on the lowest count, the involuntary manslaughter, which would have had a maximum 4 years in jail. They couldn't even do that because there wasn't strong enough evidence to show that the police officer committed a criminal act, not a tragedy, not a mistake, not something went wrong, a crime.
The other thing is you have to look at this officer's state of mind. And all along, supporters of Michael Brown had said, well, this cop, he told him, get off the street. They said, no. Then he reversed his car once he realized that these were probably the guys involved in the strong arm robbery. He reversed his car. When he got back next to them, Michael Brown's friend said that the officer opened his door and hit Michael Brown, and that he intentionally began a confrontation with Michael Brown. Here's just two of the witness testimonies that I had before me. This is witness 40. When Michael Brown first approached the cop car, quote, the cop tried getting out, and the big one hit the door, and the cop looked PO'd and tried opening the door again. The big kid hit the door with his gut, and the little one punched the mirror. The little one is the one who told the story about how allegedly it was all the cop being the aggressor at the car. Something gold fell on the ground. The big one is half in the window or / door, I can't remember, but I swear the little one had the cop's leg. And then the next person says, this is witness 44, question, okay, so you're saying he charged, meaning the big guy? Yeah, and he jerked his head forward, just instantly the car pulled backwards, and he, meaning the big guy, instantly ran to the window like he had something to say to him, meaning Officer Wilson. Okay, and from what you can tell, he appeared to be mad? Yes.
Okay, and so going to exactly what you read, the other thing the prosecutor told us today was, you know the video that's been out there of Michael Brown stealing the cigars? I was never sure, that the grand jury heard, that the police officer knew that this person had just committed a robbery. He is a suspect. He's not just a kid walking down the street. He is a guy who matches a description of a robbery that just took place, and that's why he's confronting this young man. We now know that for a fact. So in this police officer's mind, these aren't just two kids who are walking. These are two guys, and one of them is matching the description of someone who just committed a robbery.
And then, according to the eyewitnesses, he begins a violent confrontation with the police officer, which we didn't even get to the ultimate part, which is that resulted in the police officer struggling with that man over his own firearm, which he then fired off 2 times, hitting Michael Brown in the hand once. Michael Brown's blood was all over the gun. There's no question that they struggled over the officer's gun in that car.
And what the cousin of Michael Brown is saying now is that because of that struggle in the car, Michael then walked away, and now their argument is that the cousin's argument was the police officer is now enraged, and he's not acting to protect himself. He's not acting as a police officer. He's acting as a guy who's pissed off.
Well, why can't that be possible?
Because this kid the police officer.
Let me just tell you something, because the part of this case that's always troubled me is I get everything we've talked about thus far. Okay, the kid, and they had the confrontation at the car, and now the officer feels for his safety. He feels for his life is in danger. But then the kid runs away. He's not a kid. He's an 18-year-old. He runs away. And it's always been hard to believe that somebody fleeing for his life from an armed officer would then make the decision to stop, turn around, and charge the officer, knowing Officer Wilson doesn't know Michael Brown doesn't have a gun, but Michael Brown knows he doesn't have a gun. So why would he do that? That's the part of the cop story that always smelled to me. And yet what this prosecutor told us is that the witnesses who were credible, including the African-American witnesses, described Michael Brown as making a, quote, full charge at the officer.
Correct. And that's a huge point that came out. It was a great question. It was a very specific
Fox News question.
Okay. It was a very specific answer. And going back to the fact, this is a police officer now who has been assaulted. A weapon has been discharged in his vehicle, and he also has to have in the front of his mind, he's also wanted for robbery. There's like 3 things that are going on here, which gives the police officer a reasonable belief that a criminal activity is afoot, and he can now pursue him. And Missouri laws, Megan, are very liberal regarding police officers' actions and what actions they're allowed to take to pursue someone who they believe has just committed a crime.
You know, Furman was making the point that if we got this case before a real jury, what would happen is Officer Wilson would have an attorney present who would cross-examine all the witnesses. It wouldn't go better from Michael Brown's side in a courtroom. It would go worse from Michael Brown's side.
Somebody asked me on Facebook a little while ago, well, Arthur, if you were the prosecutor, would you have gotten an indictment? And the truth is, Megan, after I saw all of the evidence, and I'm the chief prosecutor, I don't want an indictment. I have to live with this case. I have to take it to a trial. I need to be confident as a prosecutor I could prove this case beyond. Correct. I have to be able to look at a judge and say, I know I can prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt to a jury. They couldn't even get over a preponderance of the evidence, which is just 51%, not beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a much higher standard. This is a case that's riddled with inconsistencies. It's riddled with lies. And those 9 of those 12 people, knowing that town was going to blow up and all these other cities are having issues, they still couldn't say. They couldn't find enough evidence to even come up with the lowest charge, which means the evidence just was not there.
I just feel like the media has an obligation to let folks know what the grand jury based its decision on. That's all. You don't have to take a position on it if you don't like the result, but you have the obligation to let folks know what those grand jurors based their decision on before you condemn the grand jury. Arthur, good to see you.
Thank you. This is a horrible thing that's going on.
It's incredible to watch the pictures of the burning and the looting and the shots fired, and our own reporters finding themselves in the midst of a dangerous situation. And we'll continue to check in. We're going back live to our reporters in a minute. Well, throughout the past few hours, we have witnessed some horrifying scenes of violence, as I said. So how are the police going to get things back under control? How does the community move forward? We're going to speak with a former FBI assistant director and a former civil rights leader, and we will tell you what Eric Holder is now saying next.